All right, so Peanut Gallery, this is Heckling. Take it away.
All right, so Impact Wrestling, TNA, NWA, TNA, whatever you want to call it. GFW, for all I care. Which
It kind of was.
I kind of might do an episode on that, too.
I think you should.
Anyways, let's talk about it, because Impact Wrestling has always been known for its innovation. Whether it was the X Division or the six-sided ring, there's always been that sense that they've always tried to set themselves apart from the competition. And the way that they did it, and the way that they still continue to do it, is by incorporating different styles of professional wrestling within the industry, trying to set themselves apart, if you will. And I think it's worked in their favor for a long time. I think that there have been points in time when they tried to do things the exact same as other promotions have done, and they just fail. And I think it just goes to show how powerful having a good niche in the professional wrestling industry is. Obviously, right now we're at a point in time to where certain niches are no longer being met because of the hiatus of Ring of Honor, and just the general lack of travel that still exists within the professional wrestling industry.
Right.
But what I want to talk about is the modern era of Impact Wrestling, because Impact Wrestling has gone through many iterations with many different owners and many different head bookers. But I want to more specifically talk about the current one that was established in 2018, I believe, is when Scott D'Amore...
That was a transition between Callis and Scott D'Amore was in 18.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm going to talk about that era because that's the era that obviously we're in, and I'm going to harken back to some of these earlier promotions. So going forward here, I think the biggest thing that we should talk about is the emphasis that they're placing on intergender wrestling.
I know. I'm sorry. I can't. For me personally, it's hard for me to really get into intergender wrestling.
Now, here's the thing about intergender wrestling. Intergender wrestling is very popular in Mexico, and the reason for that is, and we see that, and the reason for it is because that's their style, the Lucha Libre style, which we talked about previously. We talked about the Lucha Libre style of wrestling.
Right.
And Impact has always been really that sort of transition because the six-sided ring is also common in Mexican wrestling.
Yes.
So I think that what Impact Wrestling strives to be is that sort of
alternative product.
It is an alternative product, but what they mean by alternative is they mean alternative American audience oriented product.
Yes.
That's always been their MO.
There's never been a large organization. WWE did a couple of intergender matches, but nobody's put enough emphasis on it here in America because
AEW has every opportunity to do so, but they just don't.
I know why they don't, because it's stupid and it makes people uncomfortable. I don't like it. I've never liked it because there was a point in time when suspension of disbelief becomes too ridiculous. Unless it's like Awesome Kong, it's hard for me to believe that a Tessa Blanchard can defeat a Sami Callihan.
But it's very popular in Mexico. That's my point. My point is that they are that international bridge between different cultures of wrestling, different styles of wrestling, and they have been that way for a long time. And I think that was, a lot of that was. Jeff Jarrett's kind of vision was to bring all of these styles together because obviously he comes off the heels of WCW, which did a lot of that before.
They didn't do the intergender because they weren't a bunch of idiots. Well, they were idiots for other reasons.
But I don't think intergender wrestling is all that bad. But my point is that they did a lot of international crossovers. They brought in people from other countries. They introduced different styles of wrestling, and TNA, Impact Wrestling, they just continued that legacy going forward and into the modern day. So let's talk a little bit about some of those barriers that they broke down. Obviously, they had the only woman who has won a major wrestling promotions world title in the United States.
In Tessa Blanchard.
Yep. And then they have always...
That was number 4. That was a weird one.
Yeah, and they have always kind of pushed the limit with some of the hardcore concepts, whether it is your Monsters Ball match, whether it is your, exploding death match, 6 sides of steel, whatever, whatever the case may be, they've always found a way to kind of set themselves apart to become the product that was the alternative, and I believe that is what they still strive to be to this day.
Because clearly they're still around.
Right.
Something clearly there is working that brings people in enough
right.
to where they can survive. Where a company that you fought would die 3 or 4
right.
times.
And I think that there have been a lot of points in time when people were like, oh, well, they're on the verge of death. But here's the thing about Impact Wrestling, and I think it speaks a lot to the creativity. And I think the reason that they're so creative with these concepts, with these matches, is because they had to do so out of necessity.
I can see that.
They were always playing second fiddle to the bigger promotions, whether that would be WWE at first.
Or at that time, Ring of Honor. But
Ring of Honor really came up in the mid-2010s. They kind of overtook that spot number 2. So they've always kind of playing fiddle with the second or third slot. They were never number 1.
Well, they're still number 3 because of AEW,
right.
But that's for another reason.
But I think Impact has found a way to thrive within that position, despite
absolutely.
the fact that they know that they're not the most popular wrestling promotion in the world.
Right. Well, they're not trying to compete with it anymore. They know they're not. They have carved their own niche out that people obviously still enjoy.
Yeah. Whether that is pushing the limits with people going for world titles, whether that is introducing intergender championships, quite literally with the Digital Media Championship, and that's another thing too that I want to touch upon. But let's go back to that after we're done talking about the innovation part of it, and it is my belief that that spirit that Jeff Jarrett started and the innovation that they wanted to bring to the table was the reason that they continue to survive.
Right. And Scott D'Amore, he's been with Impact with TNA for years and years and years.
And let's talk a little bit about Scott D'Amore, because I don't think a lot of people know who Scott D'Amore really is.
Right.
And I think I mentioned this, but he's almost like the Vince McMahon of Canadian wrestling.
Yeah, he's been a booker since the early 90s?
Yeah. And he really he founded like 2 of the top wrestling schools in Canada. Mm-hmm. I mean, he obviously didn't found the Dungeon, but he worked very extensively with the Dungeon.
Right. He debuted Frontier Pro Wrestling, I believe.
In Border City Wrestling.
Yep. That
and
are farm systems for him, and those are still very reputable schools. They're almost like the Monster Factory and what is that really big one out in New York?
That is a Monster Factory, isn't it?
No, I think the Monster Factory is in New Jersey.
Oh, okay. But anyways, my point is that really this man knows what he's doing. He's not just some guy who just came in and like
he's not a vanity project guy, and I hate saying this, but he's not Tony Khan.
Right.
Tony Khan is very smart because he surrounded himself with people who know what they're doing.
Right, who know the industry.
OVW was the other one that I was thinking about.
Yes.
Another very prominent wrestling school / promotion that Al Snow now runs.
Right.
And actually now is the big feeder for
Impact.
No, they're a big feeder for AEW right now.
And they're also a feeder for Impact Wrestling. But the point is that this man, he knows the business.
He's been in it, I think, like since the late 80s.
Yeah.
He's always worked in wrestling.
But,
always.
I don't think he's as well known because he spent the majority of his career in an entirely different country.
Right, and also backstage. He was never really up front up until his TNA days in the early 2000s with Team Canada.
Right.
And even then, people just thought that he was a little dweeb manager, not one of the main writers of the show.
Right, exactly.
That's the difference, because the internet is a powerful thing because we did not know about that back then, and D'Amore really came into his prominency around that transition time between the two. Everybody knew about the McMahons because they're multi-generation. D'Amore was generation 1 for his family, I believe.
Right.
Don't quote me on that.
But he's like Paul Heyman was with ECW back in the day. I mean, that's kind of how I see it. He's not the biggest or the best or the most, he doesn't have the most resources in the world, but he can turn the resources he has into something.
Paul Heyman was very much more of that let's do everything sort of guy. I mean, if you're having
more is like how much
he's being strategic.
What resources do we have? Because Impact Wrestling still deals with the same problems that most other wrestling promotions don't have to deal with, and that's the constant turnover of the roster.
Right. They actually really don't have that. You don't see a big turnover of the roster.
But over the course of many years, and this is why being number 2 and number 3 has always been such a problem, is because there has been a constant turnover of the roster with those smaller promotions.
Right, I can understand
because
that.
they feed into other promotions. They
get sought after because they're making waves because they're there.
Right.
And also the contracts aren't for as much money at the end of the day.
Right.
It's still money. It's still a very money-driven business. Welcome to Capitalism 101.
Right. And again, you have had these large turnovers of people. I mean, and then you lose people that were important. It's like, well, your contract is up. Now you got to think strategically.
Like Kurt Angle's, Samoa Joe's, and people like AJ Styles.
Right. And so some of the decisions that they make, they may not seem like the most popular decisions, but you also have to understand that maybe this person is on their way out.
Right. And that's the other thing, too. I mean, Impact Wrestling leaned on, your Kurt Angles for years.
Yep.
To the point where it didn't feel like a TNA show without Kurt Angle.
Right.
But now, luckily, Impact Wrestling and how D'Amore has structured this is where there is a good amount of people who are either in that main event scene or that fucking close.
Right.
So if a Moose leaves for some reason, you have your W. Morrisseys, you have your Jake somethings, you have people who could legitimately fill that spot.
Right.
That vacuum.
And they're always, and then there's always people coming in as well.
Right. TNA never really had that up until D'Amore. Mm-hmm. Because they leveraged so much on those people because they were the marquees. It's like, yeah, they're marquees,
right?
But you need to build new people.
And I think way back in the earlier Anthem days, the Owl Anthem days, and I think about some of those people and some of those rosters. There was a lot more turnover back then with those rosters.
There was that big clean out of a lot of big people, like Matt Bennett, both of the fucking Hardys. I think Samoa Joe left at that time. AJ Styles left at that time. Right. There were a lot of people. A lot of big stars that left at that time. A lot of
mainstays, right. So the Impact Wrestling that we see today, the only lineages that they share are titles and its history just as a company.
Right.
This company has gone through so many different iterations, but it always manages in some way to survive through whatever storm is being put out in front of them.
Right.
And I can credit the writing team for a lot of that because they have to find creative ways and innovative ways to maintain the continuity of titles despite rosters being turned around as much as they are.
And what I like about D'Amore is that he understands that working partnerships and relationships is the key for that survival because they were so scared for the longest time of working with the other big name companies. Like they're trying to do business with you.
Right.
It's two wrestling companies doing business with each other, and that is it. They're not trying to sabotage you. They're trying to benefit themselves and say, hey, here's this, have that. Scott D'Amore understands that.
Right.
That's why he's like, hey, Mickie James, if you and WWE want to have this exclusive thing with the Royal Rumble, go for it.
Right. And, some other things, too, is that, and let's talk a little bit about those international partnerships, because that has always been a big part of their reputation, is having partnerships with other promotions, whether it is domestic, like it is here with Ring of Honor, or international with the likes of
New Japan.
of New Japan Pro Wrestling.
They had Finjuice
and Triple A.
Right.
Especially those two, because those two have wrestling styles that are very different than what you might be used to seeing in America.
Exactly.
And Impact Wrestling is the perfect place for that, because Impact Wrestling has always been known for being the alternative, having those different styles.
Right.
WWE and AEW, I can argue, can't even touch that outside of whatever watered down shit they have.
I can understand that.
In Impact Wrestling, you have more of an opportunity to be more creative with the resources that you are given.
Right.
And incorporating something like an ROH partnership in there helps to keep brands alive as well. And you see that
Nobody wants Ring of Honor to go away.
And you see that they're willing to continue the styles. You had a pure wrestling match. Impact Wrestling is not known for pure wrestling, but they did it because it is the perfect breeding ground for that kind of stuff to take place.
Right. And then they have people like Minoru Suzuki coming in for a breath and a half, and your Laredo Kids, for instance, who is a mainstay in the X Division. Why? Because maybe he's not, even though he is a champion, they don't have anything for him right now. Hey, Impact Wrestling was calling for you. Maybe you can go and work over there. Still earn some money, and you're still under contract with us, but it's something different. And that's what I love about, and I think I don't think you said it before, but it was, it's akin to Japanese wrestlers going on excursion.
Yeah.
Because it really helps develop their own style.
Right.
You got them fundamentals. Go on excursion
and learn new styles.
Right.
And I think Impact Wrestling is an excursion for fans. Mm-hmm. It exposes fans to different styles of wrestling.
It's a little more organized now than it was in the past.
It exposes fans to things like intergender wrestling. You may not be comfortable with it, but you have to give it a shot. You have to give it a try.
Right. I think I did. I just didn't particularly enjoy it.
And then or people are like, I don't know about the cruiserweights. I want to see something with the X Division. And even then, the X Division isn't really a cruiserweight division. It's just a way for people to have something different.
Right.
Putting women into hardcore matches, into spots that might make other people feel uncomfortable. Impact Wrestling is willing to try it.
Here's the thing. I will even argue to your point that if it wasn't for TNA and the Knockouts division, we would not have the emphasis on women's professional wrestling that we do now.
Yeah, and people are like, "Oh, it started with NXT." No, it didn't. It
did not.
The Knockouts division in TNA inspired these women to
now
go and train.
You can say Trish Stratus and Lita, but they only had it for like a cup of coffee because they were so popular.
But even then, it was still watered down.
Right,
I'm thinking like Awesome Kong and Gail Kim. They had a blood feud for a long ass time,
and they had awesome matches, and they had a story. And honestly, I think we have to at least mention Dutch Mantel.
Yeah.
As it relates to that, that was his baby.
Right.
He was in control of the Knockouts.
Right.
And you have to give a lot of credence to his. Maybe instead of a booking style for a certain company, maybe you can go towards different bookers, like your Jim Cornette, your Dutch Mantels.
And that's what I plan on doing, because there were so many iterations of Impact. Mm-hmm. But, talking about the current Impact Wrestling roster, Impact Wrestling position within the organization, I think it is a great breeding ground for different styles to be presented to wrestlers and to audiences alike.
Right.
They're not big budget shows, which is fine. They don't have to be big budget shows.
I have
They
more
have
fun.
they have the big budget feel though.
Right. Here's the thing with Impact, and I will even say this as a person who has gone to multiple Impact shows live. I have more fun at an Impact show than a WWE and AEW show any day of the week. Because not only are you that close and personal, it's inexpensive. You get to talk with some of the fans next to you. It's a different environment. It's like
Right.
it's like going home to your family for Thanksgiving instead of going to a Halloween party.
Right.
That's literally the difference.
Right. And with AEW and WWE, you kind of know what to expect. Mm-hmm. With Impact Wrestling, there's always going to be something a little bit different that maybe you were not expecting.
Right. And I do my weekly shows, and Impact Wrestling is one I cover. Sometimes they have a bad show. Sometimes they have a freaking awesome show.
Right.
And with AEW, you get, okay, it was a good show. Or WWE, oh, it was a bad show. But then you get like those one glimmers. With Impact, it's literally like this. Like, you never know what you're going to get.
And I think that's what makes it so fun, too, was that there is that emotion. There's those emotions. And it's never really dull. You know, it's never really dull when the interaction is just there.
Right. Dull and bad are different.
Right.
And that's the thing, because you can have a good wrestling promotion and good shows, and it still be dull because you know it's going to be good.
Right.
Instead of, Impact Wrestling, where you get a variety of different things. Now, sometimes they might lean a little more heavily on backstage segments. Sometimes they might have one or two matches that make no sense as it relates to the show. Sometimes they don't. And it's that kind of variety that keeps, at least me personally, watching now.
Right. And, again, and, just to kind of conclude things, Impact Wrestling in its current iteration is still that, in my opinion, the center of that innovation style. And I'm going to call that an innovation style because they're a wrestling promotion that's not afraid to try new things. They're not afraid to try new styles.
They're not afraid to work with new people.
Right. They're not afraid to work with new people. They're very open and flexible with booking. They're great with partnerships. And I think overall, whether you're a fan or a wrestler, there's always a treat when it comes to stopping by an Impact show, pay-per-view, excursion, whatever the case may be.
If they are ever in your town, I would actually personally recommend an Impact show over a WWE or an AEW show any day of the week.
Oh yeah. For the price, you're always going to get something a little bit.
It's always worth the price too. That's the other thing. It's always worth the price. Always. Yeah. We have never gone to a show where I'm really disappointed about this show. I don't think we've ever said that. We always say, "Oh, that was a lot of fun. There was a lot of great energy." Yeah. And we always sit at TGI Fridays and see the wrestlers and say, "Hey, that was a really good job." And you get to really connect with them. There's a different connection with them.
Is.
And I think that's what I really like about Impact. They're keeping that personal connection with fans. They could probably expand. They probably could. I think it's a choice that they don't.
Right. I think it is as well. I don't want them to do it at big arenas. I think they'll lose that feel.
Right. And they tried to do that too.
Yeah,
Keep that in mind. They tried to do that, but it just didn't work.
Right.
This is your alternative, ladies and gentlemen. Right here is Impact.
Right, and I even think more so than AEW is,
Yep.
I think that Impact is still, and
always
has been, always will be your true wrestling alternative.
And I think the one that you should cover next is GCW, because I think they are that alternative on the hardcore style.
Oh, yeah.
A lot more close and personal, and they're growing really fast.
Yeah, I think that within the next couple of years, there's going to be some serious competition with Impact Wrestling.
I would not be surprised if GCW, they get some big TV deals.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either. Anyways, when we come back, wrestling lesson with Tiger Height,
and I'm going to be covering January pay-per-views for TNA Impact Wrestling.